I'm Madison Ellis, 33 years old, and for the past 10 Christmases, I've come home hoping this one might feel different. This time, my seat at the table might mean something. This year, I wouldn't be the one they forgot or brushed past or left out again. But as I looked around the dining room full of clinking glasses and bright laughter, I saw that same empty spot in front of me. No plate, no present, no place in the story. They were telling each other what they didn't know was this Christmas. I'd brought something they weren't expecting, something that would change everything before I go any further. Let me know where you're listening from in the comments, and hit that like and subscribe button if you've ever had to remind someone you're not invisible. I was born and raised in Hartford, Connecticut, the middle child between Daniel and Brooke. Both of them were easy for our parents to brag about. Daniel had the grades, the medals, the medical school acceptance letters. Brooke had beauty that opened doors before she could drive. I had a little of everything, but never enough of anything to stand out. My father, Richard, is the kind of man who prefers numbers to people. He's run a financial firm for decades and sees the world in terms of wins and losses. My mother, Linda, was raised in a generation that prized elegance, obedience, and the appearance of success. Above all else, she kept a neat home, a polished image, and a calendar full of social events from a young age. It was clear what this family rewarded. Ambition polished charm. Daniel got his first car the day he turned 16. Brooke flew to Paris at 17 to model for a skincare brand. I got a modest bookstore gift card and a cardigan that still had the price tag from the clearance rack. I tried not to make a fuss. I was taught not to. I told myself they were just busy, that maybe next year would be different, that if I worked a little harder, they'd notice. I smiled in the family photos, sat on the sidelines during the conversations, and accepted each missed invitation as if it were normal. After high school, they encouraged me to follow in their footsteps, business school at their alma mater. I didn't want it, but I went trying to be the daughter. They respected the one who didn't cause waves. I barely lasted 2 years. Every class made me feel like I was walking through someone else's life, until one day I stopped walking, dropped out, moved west, and never looked back. I landed in Seattle with 2 suitcases and what was left of my college fund. I rented a room above a bakery and got a job answering phones during the day and taught myself web development. At night it was messy. It was mine. No one called, no one visited, but for the first time, I could breathe. I started a tiny online shop selling custom planners for small business owners, then digital tools, then a subscription service for entrepreneurs. It grew slowly, painfully, and then all at once, one product led to another. One client turned into thousands by the time I turned 30. I had 3 offices, 50 employees, and a company called Northwave that nobody in my family even knew existed. I kept it from them, not out of spite, but out of habit. Every time I tried to share even a glimpse, they changed the subject or offered a distracted nod. My father once asked if I was still playing with websites. My mother said gently that it might be time to find something stable, Brooke suggested. I model in a startup ad because they use regular-looking people too. I spent years chasing their approval, the way some people chase sunlight in winter. Never quite sure it was real this year, though. Something shifted. Northwave had just completed a massive acquisition, the kind that made headlines, the kind that got my face on the cover of a magazine. I held that issue in my hands, and for the first time, I felt solid. Like maybe now they'd see me. I almost booked a trip to Hawaii instead of going home. Natalie had even found a villa with ocean views and blackout curtains. I hovered over the confirmation button for a full minute, but then closed the screen and told her to book my flight to Connecticut. I said I just wanted to see how they were doing, but really I think I was waiting for a reason to stop waiting this year. I brought gifts, thoughtful ones, a leather-bound journal for my dad, a vintage brooch for my mom, a donation in Daniel's name to a medical charity, and a spa retreat for Brooke. Small things that said, "I've been listening even when you weren't." I walked up the steps of my parents' colonial house with a quiet sense that something was ending and something else was about to begin. I stepped into the front hallway and felt it immediately, that chill that had nothing to do with the weather. The house looked just as I remembered it. Garland wrapped the staircase, candles flickered in the windows, and the smell of cinnamon and cloves floated through the air. Everything was beautiful, but none of it felt warm. My mother answered the door wearing a pearl necklace and a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Madison." "You're here," she said as if surprised, though we'd confirmed my arrival 3 times. She gave me a quick hug and looked me up and down. "Very professional," she added, stepping back. "That's nice." Inside, the living room buzzed with conversation and laughter. Daniel stood near the tree, arranging gifts with his wife Julia. Their twins Max and Ellie chased each other around the coffee table, each clutching a blinking, noise-making toy. Brooke lounged on the couch, one leg folded gracefully beneath her, scrolling through her phone and occasionally showing something to our father. He chuckled softly at whatever it was, his hand resting on the arm of the sofa. "Look who made it," my mother said to the room, motioning toward me. Daniel looked up and offered a casual, "Hey, Mads, glad you could squeeze us in." That nickname again, the one I stopped using in college. Brooke didn't look up. "Nice sweater," she said. "Is it new?" It wasn't. My father finally noticed the wrapped packages in my arms. "Trip? Go okay?" he asked, then returned his attention to Brooke's phone. I placed the gifts under the tree and offered to help with dinner. My mother waved me off. "Julia and I have a rhythm," she said. "Too many cooks. Why don't you relax?" So I did on the edge of the couch, hands folded in my lap while the others flowed around me. Daniel shared stories about a heart transplant he'd assisted with last month. Brooke talked about a commercial shoot in Los Angeles and a gala she'd been invited to next spring. When I mentioned a new development at Northwave, my father cut in to ask Daniel what he thought about the latest changes in tax law. The moment passed before I could finish the sentence. Later that evening, I stepped into the hallway to grab my coat from the closet. As I turned toward the kitchen, I heard voices behind the partially closed door. "Did you finalize the gift for Brooke?" my mother asked. "All set," my father said. "The condo's ready by New Year's. She'll love it. And Daniel's account is in place. Should give the kids a good head start." There was a pause. "Should we have gotten something for Madison?" my mother asked. Her tone was light, almost casual. "What would we even get her?" my father replied. "She never uses what we've given her before, and she wasn't even supposed to come." "I suppose you're right." I didn't move. I waited until I heard the clink of glasses, then quietly turned and made my way upstairs. The guest room smelled like lavender and wood polish. I sat on the edge of the bed and looked at the untouched suitcase still by the door. I had packed for a few days just in case. I didn't know what I had expected, but I hadn't expected to hear them speak like that, like I was an obligation no one had remembered. That night I didn't sleep much. I watched the snow fall through the narrow window and tried to decide what to do. Part of me wanted to leave to slip out before dawn and catch the first flight back to Seattle. But another part, the part that had learned how to run a company, how to hold her ground in boardrooms full of men who underestimated her, wanted to stay. Not to prove anything, just to see how far things would go. Christmas morning started the way it always had. The sound of carols floated up from the living room where my father played the piano with practiced ease. My mother directed the staff from room to room, placing serving trays and lighting extra candles. By the time I made it downstairs, the family was already deep in conversation. Julia handed out coffee, Brooke posed for a picture with the tree, and Daniel was in the middle of telling a story about his department's research grant. "There she is," my mother said with a smile. "We didn't want to wake you. You looked tired last night." No one had told me what time to be downstairs. It was small, but it echoed something I'd grown used to decisions made without me. "Would you mind helping in the kitchen?" my mother asked after breakfast. "Brooke needs to rest her hands. She's shooting next week, and Daniel's with the kids." In the kitchen, I peeled potatoes while Julia and my mother discussed an upcoming charity event. When I tried to join in the conversation, shifted to their interior decorator, someone I didn't know. After the food was prepped, we all gathered by the tree for the annual photo. I was placed on the edge of the group. I smiled anyway. Dinner was held in the formal dining room, the table stretched to its full length and covered in linen and crystal. Place cards directed us to our seats. Mine was at the far end beside Max and Ellie. Daniel and Brooke sat at the center with our parents. From my spot, I could barely hear the main conversation. My father raised his glass for the yearly toast. "To family and another year of blessings." "Daniel, congratulations on the new grant." Brooke, that cover shoot was stunning. Everyone clinked glasses. I sipped quietly and waited. When I mentioned our latest product launch, my mother nodded and turned to Brooke. "Tell everyone about that director you met." By dessert, I'd stopped trying. I helped Max cut his cake while the adults discussed winter travel plans. The staff began clearing dishes. My father stood near the tree and clapped his hands. "Time for gifts," he said. This was his tradition. He'd hand each gift out one by one, making a short speech before each one. It was theatrical and long-winded, but everyone expected it. To Daniel and Julia, he said first, handing over a sealed envelope, "A little something to start the twins' college fund." Daniel opened it, smiled, and hugged both parents. Then came Brooke's gift, a velvet box with a set of keys. "Your new place in the city," my father said. "We know the commute has been a lot." Brooke shrieked and ran to hug them both. "It's perfect." More envelopes followed. A cruise for Aunt Elaine and Uncle George, a sports car for my cousin Greg, who had just graduated. Even the staff received crisp envelopes and quiet thank yous. I sat with my hands folded, watching the pile shrink. Finally, my father looked around. "Well, that's everything. Time for coffee." There was a pause. My mother leaned in and whispered something. My father cleared his throat. Madison?" He said, "Your gift must have been delayed. Shipping issues, I'm sure. We'll send it to your place once it arrives." The room went quiet. I nodded. There had been years when I would have accepted that without a word, would have helped clear dishes to stay useful, would have swallowed the knot in my chest like I always did. But not this time. This time I didn't feel small. This time I'd brought something with me, and it was time they saw it. I stood quietly watching the room shift around me. Coffee cups were being cleared, chairs pushed back. No one said anything directly. A few glances passed between people, but no one met my eye. My father refilled his wine glass without comment. My mother rearranged a napkin that didn't need fixing. Brooke had gone back to her phone. Daniel leaned toward Julia, whispering something that made her frown. I placed my napkin gently on the table and pushed back my chair. "Actually, I said I have something I'd like to share." The room paused. I walked out to the entryway, opened my suitcase, and pulled out a slim portfolio and a rolled magazine. When I came back in, I didn't sit. I stood at the head of the table, my father's spot, and laid the magazine in the center. The cover faced up, clear and unmistakable. My photo, my name, a headline in bold across the top. Daniel reached for it first. His brow lifted as he turned to the inside feature. "Northwave," he asked. "This is your company." I nodded. "The company I started after I dropped out, the one you all thought was a hobby." I opened the folder and pulled out 3 documents. "This is our most recent acquisition agreement. We bought out a competitor for $87 million last month. This is our latest investor report. And this," I said, "is our current valuation, $118 million. We have over 15 million users, 4 offices, and 300 employees. I own 62%. No one spoke. My mother reached for her wine. Her hand trembled just slightly. My father was the first to find words. "Why didn't you tell us I tried?" I said. "Over and over again. You changed the subject, or told me to find something stable, or made a joke." Brooke leaned closer to the magazine, running her finger over the headline. "They really wrote this about you." "They did." My father cleared his throat. "This is impressive, Madison. Truly. I wish we'd known sooner. We could have advised." "You don't understand tech," I said gently. "You've said that more times than I can count. Called it a phase, a bubble, that I should focus on real work." The silence hung in the air. I didn't rush to fill it. "I'm not sharing this to boast," I continued. "But I've sat at this table for years being treated like I didn't matter. I brought gifts today for each of you, thoughtful ones, but I didn't get even a card in return, not even a placeholder. I wasn't on the list." Aunt Elaine looked uncomfortable. Uncle George shifted in his chair. Brooke didn't say anything, but her expression had changed. "You've always been so quiet about what you do," Julia said after a moment. "I didn't realize, because when I did speak, I said no one listened." Daniel leaned forward. "Mads." "It's Madison," I said. "I've asked you not to call me that since college." He blinked. "Sorry." I collected the magazine and the documents, slipping them back into the folder. My father looked like he wanted to say more, My mother looked stunned. "I've booked a suite at the Four Seasons," I said. "I'll be leaving now. My driver's waiting." My mother stood abruptly. "But it's Christmas, I know." "But we always—" "No," I said. "You always." I watched. I waited. This year I'm done waiting. As I turned toward the foyer, Daniel stood up. "Wait, you can't just drop this and walk out." "I didn't drop anything," I said calmly. "I told you the truth, that's all." The front door opened quietly. Cold air spilled in. My coat was already draped over my arm. I stepped outside into the falling snow. The ride into town was silent except for the occasional turn signal or soft hum of the road beneath us. I leaned back against the seat and closed my eyes. When I arrived at the hotel, the front desk was warm and lit in gold. They already had my room key waiting. Upstairs, the suite overlooked the skyline. Snow settled on rooftops and trees below. I changed into comfortable clothes, ordered dinner, and let the quiet fill the space. My phone buzzed again and again. 6 calls from my mother, 4 from my father, 3 from Daniel. Brooke had texted twice. There were messages from relatives I hadn't heard from in years. Suddenly they were proud. Suddenly they remembered me. I didn't open most of them. I called Natalie. "Well," she asked. "Exactly like you guessed." There was a short pause. "How do you feel?" I looked out at the snow-covered streets. Like I finally said it. "That's enough for now." Dinner arrived just after 8. I ate slowly, watching the lights across the city blink on and off. After the last bite of roast chicken, I checked my messages. My mother's were a mix of apologies and justifications. "We didn't know," she wrote. "You should have told us." My father's tone was sharper. "We need to talk. I have contacts that could help." Daniel had written something simpler. I didn't realize. "Can we talk?" Brooks was what I expected. "This is wild. We have to catch up. Also, if you need someone for branding stuff, I'm around." None of it surprised me. A little after 9, my phone rang again. My father. I let it go once, twice. On the 3rd, I answered. "Madison," he said, "this behavior is unacceptable. You embarrassed your mother. You humiliated us. Hello to you too. I'm serious. You can't just walk into a room, drop news like that, and leave. It's dramatic. It's immature." I exhaled slowly. "Is that what you called to say?" He paused. "We're proud of you," he added reluctantly. "But you kept this from us. You never gave us the chance to be part of it." "I tried," I said. "Thanksgiving 2 years ago I brought it up. You changed the subject to Daniel's new boat. Christmas before that, I told Mom we'd expanded offices. She asked Brooke to show everyone her new magazine cover." There was a silence. "You built something remarkable," he said. "But we're still your family." "You are," I said. "But I'm not a background character anymore. I'm not going to keep trying to earn space at a table that was never set for me." He didn't argue. After we hung up, I saw a new message from my mother. She wanted to meet for coffee the next morning. I said yes. Whatever happened next, I knew I wouldn't go back to who I had been before. The hotel lobby was quiet the next morning. A soft instrumental version of a Christmas hymn played somewhere near the fireplace. I found a table by the windows and ordered 2 coffees, 1 black one with cream. My mother arrived a few minutes later, bundled in a gray coat with fur-trimmed gloves tucked neatly into her purse. She sat down without saying much. Her makeup was done, but her eyes looked tired. "Thank you for meeting me," she said softly. I nodded. The waiter brought our drinks and disappeared again. "I've been trying to think of where to start," she said, holding her cup with both hands. And I realized, I don't know. "Truth is usually a good place," I said. She looked down at the tabletop, then back at me. "I never meant to make you feel less important than Daniel or Brooke. I believe you didn't mean to," I said. "But that doesn't change how it felt." She twisted the bracelet on her wrist, the one my father gave her on their 40th anniversary. "You were always different," she said. "Daniel had his goals lined up since he was 12. Brooke knew she wanted to model before she finished middle school. You were creative, independent. I never knew quite what to do with that. Did you try?" She blinked. "Did you ever ask what mattered to me?" I asked. "Instead of pushing me toward what mattered to you." She didn't answer right away. She sipped her coffee and set it down gently. "I thought I was protecting you," she said. "The world rewards certain types of success. I wanted that for you. But when I built something that didn't look like what you expected, there was no celebration. Her voice was quiet, because I didn't recognize it for what it was. That's not your failure. It's mine. We sat there for a few moments without speaking. The clinking of dishes and low voices around us faded into the background. I can't change the past, she said, but I'd like to understand your present, if you'll let me. I nodded once. 2 days later, I met Daniel for lunch at a quiet restaurant near the river. He'd picked the place himself, said it was one of Julia's favorites. We sat by a window overlooking the snow-covered sidewalk. The server brought hot tea, and we waited until our orders had been placed before speaking. I've been thinking about what you said Daniel started. Actually, I've been thinking about it since Christmas night. Amanda was furious. I raised my eyebrows slightly. She said she's felt uncomfortable for years, he continued. Didn't know if it was her place to speak up, but this time she did. He stared into his cup for a second. She also told me something I didn't expect, that I've been competing with you, even when you weren't trying to compete with me. I wasn't, I know, he said, but that made it worse. He set the cup down and leaned forward. Do you have any idea how hard it is to be the one everyone expects to succeed, to carry all that weight all the time? I thought you loved being a doctor. I do, but the politics, the pressure, it wears you down. Sometimes I wonder if I would have picked something else if I'd had the space to choose. He paused. When you left school, I didn't understand, but part of me envied you. You did something I never could. You walked away. I didn't respond right away. The waiter brought our food. We thanked him, and Daniel waited until he was out of earshot. I'm sorry, he said, for the nickname you hated, for brushing off your work, for not defending you. I looked up and nodded. Thank you. Later that week, Brooke invited me to her apartment. Not the one our parents had just bought her, the one she was still living in until the lease ended. It was smaller but tastefully decorated, full of soft lighting and white accents. She opened a bottle of champagne and handed me a glass. Your outfit in that article, she said. It was perfect. Do you work with a stylist? If not, I know someone. We talked for a while about surface things, fashion, travel, skincare. Then out of nowhere, she asked, do you know why I started modeling? I shook my head. Because it was the one thing neither of you could do. You and Daniel were always smart. You always had something to say. I didn't. You're smart too, Brooke, not like you two. I figured out early that being pretty was the one thing I had, so I leaned into it. She stared at the floor for a moment, then looked back at me. Do you know what it feels like to have your entire worth tied to something that's already fading? I nodded. I was jealous when I saw that article, she said, not because of the money or the success, but because of how they talked about you. The impact, the intelligence. No one's ever said that about me. She poured another splash of champagne, then sat down beside me. I don't even know what I'd build if I started over, she said. I don't know what else I'm good at. Neither did I told her. That's the point. As winter shifted towards spring, things changed slowly. My father sent articles about emerging tech trends, sometimes with handwritten notes asking for my opinion. My mother asked about my team, my offices, the kind of work I actually did. Daniel and I started having monthly video calls. Brooke enrolled in an online business course. She called to ask if she could run some ideas by me. The conversations weren't always smooth. We slipped back into old rhythms sometimes, but something had opened that hadn't been open before, and in the quiet moments between all of that, I began to feel something else, something I hadn't expected. Steady. The following year moved quickly. Northwave's growth brought a new set of challenges, but also a sense of direction I hadn't felt before. We opened a satellite office in Austin and launched a mentorship program for women in tech. The pace was steady, focused. I traveled often, but Seattle still felt like home. One morning in early summer, Natalie knocked on my office door. You have a message from your cousin Allison, she said. She left a voicemail on the main line asking if you'd be open to lunch. Allison had grown up closer to Brooke. We'd shared childhood Thanksgivings and the occasional family vacation, but never anything deeper. I hadn't spoken to her since before the article came out. I'll respond, I said, setting the paperwork aside. But let's not schedule anything just yet. Natalie nodded and stepped out. The next week, my inbox filled with messages from names I barely recognized. My father's business partner, a distant aunt, even a family friend who once told me I was too quiet to lead anything. Most of the messages had the same tone. Congratulations, requests for introductions, suggestions we might collaborate on something in the future. A few included resumes from nieces or nephews who could really learn a lot from someone like me. I forwarded 2 of them to our HR director. The rest I archived. At the end of that month, I had dinner with Daniel and Julia at their place outside Boston. The kids had gone to bed early. Julia poured tea while Daniel finished clearing the dishes. He sat across from me with a different kind of energy than usual, quieter, more deliberate. "We've been talking," he said, "about moving out of the city, somewhere smaller, simpler. Still practicing I'd shift into more general care, maybe community health." Julia nodded. "We want the kids to grow up in a slower environment." I looked at Daniel. "Are you nervous?" He thought about it. "I am. But I'm also ready to stop living for Dad's approval." It was the first time I'd heard him say it out loud. Back in Seattle, the fall brought new energy to the team. We launched a foundation to fund digital education in underserved school districts. I met with young founders from across the country, many of whom reminded me of who I'd been 10 years earlier, uncertain, hungry, and full of quiet determination. At a company retreat, one of our junior developers stood up during a Q&A session and said, "I joined this company because I read that article about you. I'd never seen someone who looked like me in that kind of spotlight." I thanked her. That night, Natalie and I walked back to our hotel from the event center. "You ever think about writing a book?" she asked. "Sometimes," I said, "but the story isn't finished yet." Thanksgiving came, and with it the usual family text thread. This time, though, there was a change. My mother sent a message asking if I'd be willing to host part of the holiday in Seattle. "No pressure," she wrote, "only if it feels right." I declined, but not because of resentment. I'd already committed to a team gathering for staff who didn't have family nearby. Still, I appreciated the invitation. The tone had shifted. Something that once felt expected now felt like a choice. In early December, a package arrived from Brooke. It was a printed draft of a business plan along with a short note. "Still rough," she wrote, "but maybe you could take a look." The plan outlined a beauty channel focused on age-positive skincare, interviews with dermatologists, product reviews without sponsorships, campaigns featuring women over 50. I sent back 3 pages of feedback and a simple message: "It's a solid start." She replied the next day with a string of emojis and one line: "Thank you for seeing me." 2 weeks later, another message came through, this time from my father. He wanted to take a cooking class. I stared at the text for a while before answering. "Who's it for?" I wrote back. "For you and me," he replied. On Christmas Eve, I arrived at my parents' house a few minutes before dinner. The tree was up, but something was different. The table wasn't the long stretch of formality I remembered. Instead, it was a circle small and warm with no head, no hierarchy. My mother handed me a carefully wrapped box with my name on it. "We drew names this year," she said. "I got you." Inside was a small silver locket. When I opened it, I saw a photo of me at 10 seated cross-legged on the floor with my first computer book stacked around me. "I found it in an old album," she said. "It reminded me that you've always been this way. I just didn't understand it then." Dinner was quieter than in years past. Less show, more listening. Daniel gave Brooke a subscription to a production software suite. Brooke gave our father a handwritten list of shared experiences they could do together: wine tastings, a weekend hike, a baking class. The kind of gifts you couldn't misplace or forget. The old habits hadn't vanished, but they were fading, and something else was settling in its place. After dessert, I stepped into the kitchen to help with dishes. My mother joined me drying plates without saying much. "I know it's been a long year," she said after a while. "It's been a good one," she nodded. "We're trying Madison." "I know." She passed me a clean plate and reached for the next one. Outside, snow had begun to fall again, slow and steady. Inside, things were quieter. But for the first time, that didn't feel like distance. It felt like space. By early spring, I started meeting with a therapist once a week. Her name was Denise Miller. She had a calm voice and a small office filled with potted plants and a ticking clock that reminded me of my grandmother's house. In one of our first sessions, she asked me what I hoped to get out of therapy. I told her I wasn't sure. I'd spent most of my life trying to prove something first to my family, then to myself. But now that things had changed, I didn't know what to do with the space left behind. We talked about my childhood, the birthdays that felt like footnotes, the way I kept quiet to avoid becoming a problem, the years of learning to make myself smaller in a house where recognition came with conditions. The interesting thing about family dynamics, Denise said one afternoon, is that they're systems. Everyone plays a role. Even roles that cause pain often serve a function. I sat back on the couch and looked out the window. So what function did being ignored serve? She waited a moment before answering. It may have protected you from the expectations that crushed your brother, or the pressure your sister faced to remain perfect in a way that had nothing to do with who she really was. That idea stayed with me long after the session ended. I started noticing how often I still tried to anticipate other people's reactions. I reread emails 3 times before sending them. I still hesitated before speaking up in meetings, even in rooms I led. At work, I began talking with our leadership team about how we defined success. We set new goals not just for growth, but for inclusion. We started a rotation where junior employees could shadow executives during major projects. We expanded our mentorship fund, and slowly something shifted. One afternoon, our head of engineering, a soft-spoken woman named Rachel, shared during a team meeting that she had spent years feeling like she had to perform leadership instead of practicing it. "This is the first place I've worked," she said, "where I feel like I can be both capable and real." It was a small comment, but it landed. Outside the office, my friendships deepened. I began hosting dinners at my house once a month, just 6 or 7 people. No presentations, no networking, real conversations. No one checking their phones. We talked about books, grief hiking trails, and the things that still kept us up at night. One Sunday, as we sat around the kitchen counter peeling oranges, Natalie looked at me and said, "You've changed. You still run like a CEO, but you sit like a person now." I laughed. "What does that mean?" "It means," she said, "you're not carrying the whole story on your shoulders anymore." That summer, I took a trip by myself. No meetings, no press. I rented a quiet cabin in Idaho and spent 5 days without a single scheduled obligation. I hiked during the day and read by the fireplace at night. I kept a notebook by my bed and wrote whatever came to mind before falling asleep. One morning, I wrote a line I hadn't expected. Being overlooked made me see things others missed. Back in Seattle, we launched a new platform designed to connect early-stage founders with each other before they were ready for funding. We called it Lantern. Not because it was flashy, but because we hoped it would help people find their way when the road still looked dark. When I told my mother about it over the phone, she asked thoughtful questions. She didn't change the subject. She didn't offer suggestions. She just listened. Brooke called later that week to say she'd been accepted into a business accelerator. They said they liked how niche my idea was, she told me. I used to think that was a bad thing. "How are you feeling about it?" I asked. "Nervous, but good nervous. Like I'm building something with both hands instead of just hoping someone gives it to me." Daniel sent me a photo of the new clinic he and Julia had opened. Smaller than his hospital department, but with a waiting room filled with plants art from local kids and a sign above the desk that read, "Health belongs to everyone." Our father hadn't said much about any of it, but in July I got a call from him on a Wednesday morning. He didn't ask about projections or press. He asked if I'd read the article he sent on family-owned tech firms in rural areas. I thought it was interesting, he said. Not because of the numbers, just how some of them built things from the ground up. It wasn't an apology, but it was a shift. One evening that month, I sat on my back porch watching the sun go down. The neighborhood was quiet except for the sound of sprinklers ticking across nearby lawns. I thought about how different everything had felt just a year ago. I no longer needed to be seen through someone else's lens to believe I mattered. I no longer waited to be invited to my own life. And I no longer feared the silence between people who used to speak only to perform something. Now it just meant space. And sometimes space was exactly what love needed. The second Christmas after everything changed felt quieter. Not because there was less to say, but because we no longer felt the need to say everything at once. The invitations came early this time, handwritten by my mother. She included a note that simply said, "We'd love to have you, but only if it feels right." I sat with it for a day or two before replying. When I arrived at the house, the snow had already started to fall. Wreaths hung in the windows just like always, but something was different. The usual spot for the oversized family portrait had been replaced with a framed collage of candid photos from the past year. In one, Brooke was at a pop-up market for her skincare line. In another, Daniel knelt beside a patient at the new clinic. And in the corner, almost tucked away, was a photo of me standing on a stage, mid-speech, smiling. We gathered earlier than usual this time. The table was smaller again, round and close. No one had place cards. Everyone sat where they wanted. Brooke poured wine while Daniel handed out cloth napkins. Julia passed around a basket of homemade rolls she'd brought, and my mother made a point to tell everyone they were Julia's recipe, not hers. My father set the last dish on the table himself and sat beside Brooke instead of at the end. Before we started eating, he cleared his throat. "This has been a year of learning for me," he said. "I've been used to defining things one way, success, family, respect. But I've realized there's more than one version of each. And I'm grateful for the people at this table who've shown me that." It wasn't a grand speech, but it didn't need to be. After dinner, we exchanged gifts, just like the year before. I had drawn Daniel's name. I gave him a leather-bound journal and a printed photograph of the original Northwave server room, the one I used to work out of when I was still shipping orders from my living room floor. "There's a note inside," I said, "for whenever you need to remember what building from the ground up looks like." He smiled and squeezed my shoulder. Brooke had drawn mine. She handed me a small wrapped box with a gold ribbon. Inside was a delicate bracelet with tiny engraved initials, mine, hers, and our mother's. "It's for the three of us," she said. "You built a business. I'm learning to build one. And Mom's trying to build something new with both of us." I looked up. My mother nodded slowly. "It's a start," she said. Later that evening, I ended up in the kitchen with Daniel while the rest of the family played a board game in the living room. The dishwasher hummed, and he leaned against the counter with his glass. "I realized something this year," he said. "All my life I've been chasing these markers. Good schools, good house, good career. But I never really stopped to ask who those markers were for. Are they still for you?" "Some of them. Not all. I love medicine, but I'm tired of the treadmill. Julia and I are thinking about cutting back, maybe taking the kids abroad for a year. Would Dad lose his mind?" "Probably. But I don't think I care anymore." He smiled at me. "You went first, you know. You taught me how to stop asking for permission." I didn't say anything. I just nodded. That night I stayed in my childhood room for the first time in years. My mother had redecorated. The old posters were gone, and in their place were framed photos of places I'd visited, photos I'd posted online over the years, ones I hadn't realized she'd saved. On the dresser sat a copy of the same magazine that had started it all. My cover story. The spine was creased, the corners worn. The next morning my father offered to make coffee. We sat at the kitchen table, just the two of us, the house still quiet. He poured 2 mugs and added cream to mine without asking. "I've been thinking," he said. "Maybe next time I'm in Seattle, you and I could tour the office. I'd like to see what you've built with my own eyes. I'd like that." He took a sip and looked out the window. "You know," he said after a while, "your mother and I, we didn't get it. We didn't know what to do with someone like you. I know, but I've come to see it now. You didn't follow the map. You made your own." Outside, the snow was beginning to melt. The sun broke through the clouds, soft and slow. I hadn't expected anything more, but in that moment, I felt something settle in a way it never had before. It wasn't resolution, not exactly, but it was real, and real was enough. The holidays faded into the new year, and life found its rhythm again. In Seattle, rain tapped gently against my windows most mornings. My team at Northwave grew, drawing people from all kinds of backgrounds. We celebrated milestones, big and small, sometimes with cake, sometimes with nothing more than a walk around the block and a quiet nod of appreciation. It felt right. At home, I kept a photo on my desk, the one my mother had found of me as a child, with my first computer. Some days I would glance at it and remember that girl sitting cross-legged on the floor, dreaming in ways her family couldn't yet see. I knew now that her worth had never been about applause or perfect gifts. She was enough, just as she was. Brooke's business started to blossom. She called one evening, her voice bubbling with excitement over a new collaboration with a women's shelter. "We're doing a workshop together," she said. "They want stories from women my age, real stories, not just before and afters." I told her I was proud, and this time I meant it without reservation. Daniel and Julia took their family abroad for 6 months, volunteering at clinics and schools. When they came back, Daniel's stories were quieter, more grounded. "I needed to learn how to listen," he said. "I think I finally am." Even my father found a kind of peace. He visited Seattle that spring, toured the Northwave office, and met my team. He asked questions not as an expert, but as someone genuinely curious. At lunch, he raised his glass and said, "You did this your own way, Madison. I'm glad I got to see it." As time passed, the old patterns didn't disappear completely, but they softened. My mother wrote letters now and then, just a few lines. She never told me what I should do, only that she was glad to know me. I believed her. The biggest change, though, was inside me. For years, I measured myself by how hard I could work or how much I could give. I thought justice meant finally being recognized, finally belonging. But real justice, I learned, is quieter. It's knowing your own value whether or not anyone else applauds. It's standing in your own truth and letting others find their way to you. If you've ever felt invisible, I hope my story reminds you that sometimes the slowest victories last the longest. Sometimes the things we build quietly, courage, kindness, resilience, become the foundations no one can take away. Thank you for listening all the way through. If you have your own story about finding your place, I'd be honored if you shared it in the comments or simply took a moment to remember how far you've come. And if you'd like to hear more stories like this, you're always welcome here.